Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Innayatul Huda from English Education Class B 2019. And in this video, I will present my research proposal with the title The Relationship Between Student Habits of Watching Movies and Their English Listening Skill. But before we start to present, I would like to say thank you to my supervisors. First is Detrandes Ahmad Talib MPD, and the second is Muhammad Tahir SPD MPD MED ERA. And for my examiners, Khairil Anwar Korompot MA PhD, and the second examiners is Dr. Maimuna Muhayang SPD MPD. Okay, now start with the chapter 1. Chapter 1, Background. Language is essential to human life. It serves a medium communication, a tool of thinking, a source of creativity, and a source of pleasure. A comprehension of language and the capacity to use it effectively provides students with access to knowledge, allows them to participate actively in society, and contribute to their personal development. Humans being most valuable possession in language. It is a means for humans to communicate their idea and information. As the world becomes more sophisticated and most constantly evolving, many encounter difficulties communicating not only in our mother tongue but also in a foreign language, particularly English language, which is more difficult to do because we have limited knowledge of foreign language. In Indonesia, English language had been introduced as a foreign language in elementary school, junior high school, senior high school, and university level. From Khan in 2015, he said that learning a foreign language is an integrated process that the learners whole study for the basic skill. First is listening skill, speaking skill, reading skill, and writing skill. One of the responsibilities that English teacher and lecturer must complete in order to improve their student proficiency in language is teaching listening. One of the crucial components of a person's language competency test is listening skill. Listening helps the student understand materials and learn a lot of new information, and they can also communicate effectively with native speakers. A number of researchers have emphasized the importance of listening skill research. They all agree that the primary skill in learning any language should be listening. Listening skill has been elevated to the status of critical importance in language learning, in both first and second language learning. According to Brown and Attar, listening is a receptive talent that fosters awareness of the language acquisition process. Listening is an important practice in the English learning process, in contrast of hearing, which just receives sound passively. A student who learns to listen should be able to pay greater attention to any topic that are assigned to them. It is because they need to grasp the pronunciation, accent, vocabulary, grammar, context, and content of the materials. According to Henry in 2015, he said that learning is a process that includes not just listening sound, but also identifying, understanding, and interpreting spoken language. This allows students to grasp how grammar is utilized and to become aware of language and how it is implied. Many students find it difficult to improve their listening skill because they find it difficult to comprehend spoken language by native speaker. The native speaker's speech level makes it difficult for students to understand the topic being discussed. Then there is a lack of knowledge about vocabulary and sentence structure, as well as many forms of frequency, stress, rhythm, and intonation. It makes it difficult for students to understand. However, there is a way for students to improve their listening skill during the English learning process. It is worthwhile to make the learning process a habit. A habit is an activity that is repeated regularly, and then habit is common action that people perform. People's action that has been done repeatedly it's something referred to as a habit. From Sujat Miko in 2014 defined habit as repeated action in the same form that is intentionally undertaken and has defined goals. People usually do something because they enjoy it or because they do it frequently. As a result, a high frequency of listening practice can help them improve their listening skill. And then, one of the most beneficial habits is to watching movie or films is moving picture are produced by recording photography with the cameras or by creating image using animation techniques or visual effects. Film or movie are cultural artifacts created by a specific culture which reflect those cultures and in turn affecting them. It is seen as an important entertainment and important techniques of educating or indoctrinating citizens. Most people enjoy watching movies as a way to unwind from their hectic daily lives. Developing a habit of watching English movie can be an interesting way to practice while also developing student listening skill, which is related to their listening skill. Aside from enjoying the plot, they can also become acquainted with native speaker voice and comprehend what they say. Furthermore, in this day and age of high technology, people can watch movie anywhere and anytime. The activity of watching English movie can be done for more than just for entertainment purpose. In general, study have examined matters relating to student habits of watching movie. For example, from Mulyadi et al. In 2015 found that there was a significant relationship between student learning method and English films. In this study, used a post-test in media and managed to get a positive response from students. And according to the student who took part in the interview, they found that it's easy to understand what was going on in a film if the film used subtitles. Therefore, it is recommended that in the teaching and learning process, English film can be used to improve student ability in speaking English. In addition, a study conducted by Megawati et al. In 2021 on their thesis found that there was a positive correlation coefficient between the habit students watching English film using subtitles, so they will have high speaking skill as well. Method in this research is a survey which was conducted to determine the extent of the relationship between the habits of watching English films with the speaking ability. And on the other hand, from Caracas et al. And 20 who on their thesis saw that by watching movies with English subtitles get easier to get the meaning of the movie's foreign language. The researchers have found that whether using subtitle or not, it is still improved at a sign level from pre-test or to post-test score. The benefits of the participant are obtained from the external assistance of the cartoons, action, hand and arm gesture, and facial expression that aid in understanding the target word when accompanied by subtitles. And then referring to the phenomenon of found and previous related study above, therefore the purpose of this research is to find out whether there is a correlation if the two variables between habits of watching English movie and listening skill are combined. The researchers' interest to conduct the research entitled The Relationship Between Student Habits of Watching Movies and Their English Listening Skill. Okay, next we move to problem statement. Based on the background of the problem, the researchers formulated the problem in this research. First is students have difficulty to native speaker, especially when they speak too quickly because they do not always have the opportunity to repeat the words. And the second is students have a limited vocabulary because the speaker may use words that the students do not know, causing them to become stuck and miss the next part of the speech. Okay, next is research question. Based on the problem statement above, researchers want to find out first, is there any relationship between student habits of watching movies and their listening skill? And the second is how much did the habits of watching English movies contribute toward listening skill? Objective of the research. Based on the problem above, the objective of the research is to find out the relationship between student habits of watching movies and their English listening skill. And the second is to find out how much habits in watching English movies contribute toward listening skill. Next is significance of the research. Considering the problem in listening, the study is expected to give some benefits. First is for students, the study can motivate students to learn to listening in attractive ways, as well as support them in increase their listening skill by watching English movie. And second, for teachers, if the study results show that there is a significant relationship between watching English movies and student listening skill, it can serve as a guide for teachers who use English movies as a medium of instruction and in addition to the speaker and handbook. The third, for the next researcher. This study will be very useful for future researchers because it can use a reference material for their research. Okay, now we move to chapter 2, pertinent ideas. Listening. Definition of listening. Listening is the first skill and basic ability that beginners must learn when learning a new language. It is a restrictive skill, which means that language learners learn new words based on way they have or listening to. According to Christine in 1971, it is the ability to understand native speaker at normal speed. According to Morley in 1972, listening entails auditory discrimination, oral grammar, selecting necessary information, remembering it, and connecting it to the process of sound and meaning form. And next is definition of listening skill. Listening is the first language skill that develops in a person's life. If students want to master English as a foreign learners, they must understand listening. Students must pay more attention to listening, which is similar to hearing but also distinct. Listening is a psychological process in which a sound wave enters the human ear and travels through the nerves into the brain in the form of electrical impulse. Meanwhile, listening is a psychological act that involves a complex brain process to recognize, comprehend, and interpret sound or statement. And next is type of listening. From Friliandita et al. In 2017 explained that two main types of listening based on the purpose that people typically use. First is discriminative listening, comprehensive listening, and then according to Brown and Abe-Wichkarama in 2010, some types of listening as follows is intensive listening. Intensive listening for perception of the components of a longer stretch of language, and the example is phonemes word, intonation, discourse, and markers. And second is responsive listening, listening to a short stretch of language, and example greetings, question, and comprehension. In order to respond in kind. And then the third is selective listening, processing long stretches of speech as a short monologues for several minutes, each can for specific intonation. The goal of such performance is not necessarily to seek global or general meanings, but also comprehend specific information in the context of longer stretches of spoken language. And the fourth is extensive listening. Extensive listening is purpose of developing a top-down global understanding of spoken language, listening to lecture and deriving a comprehension. Message of purpose are examples of extensive response. Extensive listening includes listening for the gist, the main idea, and making inference. Okay, next is listening difficulties. Many students find listening difficult because listening involves numerous processes. Students should understand the sound and words and to be able to interpret the meaning from what they hear. Is element of listening. There are 4 elements of listening according to Sochigaful in 2017. That's elementary as follow: ability to focus, listening for details, general understanding, and 4 is accuracy of answer. Okay, next is listening process. According to Joseph De Vito, had refined the listening process into the 5 stages. First stage is receiving. Receiving is the deliberate concentration on hearing a speaker's message, which occurs when we filter out other sources in order to isolate the message and avoid the confusing mix of incoming information. At this point, we are merely hearing the message. There are numerous reasons why the might not get a message. These are commonly to a listening obstage if we have listening barriers. We must be able to recognize them and avoid them action that contribute a poor listening. And the next is stage 2, understanding. In the understanding stage, we make effort to understand the message significance, which is not always simple. Even when we are certain that we have comprehended the message, we occasionally misunderstand what was said due of the party disparities is in our upbringing and life experiences. The listener must comprehend both the sender assumed context and the intended meaning for important communication to be successful. And the third stage is remembering. Remembering starts with listening. If you can recall what was said, you may not have been listening effectively. And the fourth is stage 4, evaluating. Only active listeners are elevated at this stage of listening. At this place, the active listener weighs information, separates fact from opinion, and determines whether or not a communication contains or prejudice. And the fifth stage is responding. The fifth and last stage of a listening process is responding. Sometimes known as feedback, it is that step at which you indicate your participation. Responding at this stage necessarily the receive people the process through verbal and or non-verbal. Next is benefit of effective listening. First is effective communication. Clear and concise transmission of information is an important component of effective human interaction, though the one is often place of understanding clear and voice, written or spoken. This direction, the listeners also bear a understand message. And the second is fewer misunderstanding. Regardless of the clarity of written or spoken message, the activity listener can prevent misunderstanding and salvage what otherwise might be miscommunicating by practicing active listening skill. Okay, next is habits. Definition of habits. A habit is a pattern of action that is performed regularly and usually happens unconsciously. According to Under and 1903, a habit from the standpoint of psychology is a more or less set manners of thinking, feelings or feeling acquired via the previous repetition of a mental experience. As stated in the American Journal of Psychology, because a person does not need to engage in self-analysis when performing moral duties. Habitual behavior especially goes initiated by those who show. Habit is something and variable habits become automatic. Habitual learning. Habitual learning is a process of developing something through repetition to improve their performance. The student perform an activity automatically and repeatedly. For example, if students want to improve their listening skill, they can do so by watching movie as a habit. In psychology, habitual is an example of non-associative learning with the repetition of a behavioral response. Characteristic of habits. According to Kuresi, in 2012, some of the key characteristics of habitual are duration, frequency, intensity, and then changing. From the duration, if the habit stimulus is not present for a sufficient amount of time before reintroduction, the response will reappear at full strength, a phenomenon known as spontaneous recovery. So, if the noisy necrolone banging of example stop and start, you are less to become habituated to it. And the second is frequency. The more frequently stimulus is presented, the faster habit formation takes place. For example, if you wear the same perfume every day, you will eventually stop noticing it. And the third is intensity. Extremely strong stimuli tend to cause slower habituation in some cases, such as deafening noises such as a car alarm or siren. Habits will never form. And four is changing. In intensity or duration of the stimulation, many cause the original response to recur. So, if the banging noise becomes louder over time, or if it stops, you had be more likely to notice it again. Next is understanding of habits. There are two approaches to the habits that come from two different academic disciplines, psychology and sociology. Habit is a psychological construct and discipline practice. First is habit as a behavior. More precisely, habit is also identified as interacting with other case factors such as attitudes, norms, and intention. In habits as a factor in behavior, here are the key points. First is habits are defined by more than just their frequency. In addition to frequency, other aspects of habits includes automaticity, the absence of deliberation or conscious thought, and a stable context for habit to be formed, and immediate environment in which behavior occurs need to remain constant. And in point B, habit strength can be measured using a set of survey questions that rate the frequency, automaticity, and context stability of a behavior for a specific person at a given point in time. This in turn can suggest the type and strength of inverse intervention required to break the habit. Is habit as practice. This section examines what practice theory weighs about habits and considers implication for practitioners rather than focusing on individual motivation. Practice theory advocates for arranging the elements that hold certain practice together. Practice theory holds that practice are made of three elements. First is material, second is competence, and the third is image. Next is movie. Definition of movie. According to Hornby in 1995, movie is a story told in the form of a series of motion pictures that can be viewed on television or in the theater. Many filmmakers have recently sold their films digitally, but in the main feature of movies remains the same. A movie or a film is a motion picture. Movies have always played an important role in people's lives, and movies have become an important part of human life and culture. A point that everyone, even the most exclusive, must have seen, must have watched it, and everyone should see a movie at least once in their lives. People who watch movies not only for entertainment but also for educational purpose. Next is type of movie. There are 8 types of movie, starting from action movie and adventures, animation, comedy, drama, fantasy, thriller, science fiction, romance, musically, and horror, and the last one is drama. This is advantage and disadvantage of movies. Many advantages can be obtained in the use of movie as a media to deliver lesson to students. They are movie can describe process, movie can arouse impression of room and time, the picture are 3 dimensions, the sound can arouse relatively picture in form of nature expression. Movie can express voice while watching his or her appearance. Color movie can add reality of object which is practiced, and the last one is movie can show scientific theory and animation. Next, move to habits of watching this movie. Movie is not only used for entertainment purpose but also education. It can be effective media in teaching learning process because it stimulates students both receptive skill and productive skill. Movie can present information, explain the process and complex concept, teach skill and influence attitude. It is meant by watching movie, students can learn on their own even though the learning materials are limited as arranged on the script. By watching English movie, the students are trained to listen and understand English spoken language. Watching English movie as a habit can improve the listening skill of students, whether they are learning English as a foreign language or whether they just want to improve their ability to listen, concentrate, and comprehend. In addition, the use of movie enables students to improve their listening skill because they become engaged the theory line of the film, which offers both a visual and audio depiction of dialogues and story in a potential real-life situation, using real emotion, diction, tone, and slang, which can sometimes be lost in a classroom environment. Okay, next is conceptual framework. You can see this is a conceptual framework of this research, starting from student habits of watching English movie, listening skill, and the noun is relationship between student habits of watching movies and their English listening skill. And now is hypothesis of this research. First is there is no significant relationship between student habits of watching movie and their English listening skill. And the second hypothesis is there is a significant relationship between student habits of watching movie and their English listening skill. And now we move to chapter 3, research method. Method in point 1, method and design of the research. This research will use a quantitative method. In the research, we'll use correlation research as designed in this research because the goal to investigate the relationship between student habits of watching movies and their listening skill. Correlation research, according to Franklin and Wallen in 1999, is a study that seeks to determine the relationship between two or more variables as well as their cause and effect. Furthermore, according to Creswell, a correlation is a statistical test that determines the tendency or patterns for two or more variables or two sets of data to vary consistently. The researcher will describe the data relating to student habits of watching English movie and their relationship with student listening skill. The independent variable X in this study is habits of watching movies, and the dependent variable is their listening skill. Next is place and time of the research. This research will be conducted at SMA Negeri 13 Pangkep. This school is located in Borong-Borong, Kasiloe Village, Kecamatan Labakam, Pangkajene Regency, South Sulawesi. Population and sample. Population. The population of this research is students from 11th grade of the Science Department at SMA Negeri 13 Pangkep. There are 3 classes, Al-Farisi, Al-Batani, and Al-Ghazali, with a total of 16 students. Next is sample. In determining the sample, the researchers will use simple random sampling. In this research, the researchers will take 30 students from 60 students. According to Gay and Deal in 1992, 30 is the sample size of the correlation study. The researchers will take 10 students from Al-Farisi class, 10 students from Al-Batani, and 10 students from Al-Ghazali. Is research variables and operational definition. First, variable. There are 2 variables in this research. There are independent variable X and dependent variable Y. The independent variable X is the variable that is controlled and manipulated by researchers. In this research, the independent variable is the habits of watching this movie, and the dependent variable Y is the reason that is measured. Dependent variable could be influenced by independent variable. In this research, the dependent variable is listening skill. Final definition. Habits of watching English movie. A habit is a pattern of action that is performed regularly and usually happens unconsciously. Habit is a manner of thinking, willing or feeling acquired via the previous repetition of a mental experience and become automatic. Habits of watching English movie is defined a pattern of action of watching English movie regularly and frequently. Watching movie can have a positive emotional impact. Next is English listening skill. The operational definition of English listening skill is the ability to effectively receive and comprehend meaning, recognizing speech, sound, and processing them into word and sentence. Is instrument of the research. An instrument of this research uses 2 instruments. The first instrument is questionnaire. A questionnaire is a data collecting technique from a number of people or respondents through a set of questions to answer. And in this questionnaire, there are 2 parts. First is part aims to collect the background of the respondent, such as age, gender, lack of exposure, recommended genders, and preferred media in watching. And the second part is the main questionnaire that aims to measure the respondent habits of watching English movie. In this case, the questionnaire consists of 20 points and 5 alternative answers. The second instrument is listening test. The second instrument is listening test. This test is used to measure the student listening skill. There are 4 different types of listening, and in this research, the researcher will use selective listening to measure the sample. There are 20 questions. is technique of data collection. The researcher used two instruments to collect the data containing a questionnaire and listening test. They are first in collecting data on the respondent habits of watching movie. The respondent will ask to fill out the questionnaire, which consists of 12 questions. The questionnaire will use a score between 1 till 5. The answer choices are made that represent the different levels of student habits of watching English movie. The second, to measure the listening skill of the student, the researchers allow students to watch English film whose title will be determined by the researchers. The third, in this case, the researcher asked the student to answer the listening test. In this test, the students were asked to listen a dialogue about hotel booking played on a laptop. And fourth, while listening, the student will required to fill in some of the blank dialogue script spoken on the laptop to complete the dialogue made by speaker. And the fifth, after complete the blank in dialogue, the student answer the question to test whether the student understood what they have listening or not. The sixth, after the test, the researchers check the student answer on the fill the blank of the question answer, whether or not they had filled the blank with the correct word. After that, the researchers collect all tests from the student. The last one is technique of data analysis. After collecting data, the researcher will take some step of analyze data. The analysis steps will as follows. For this questionnaire data, the researchers categorize the score result of questionnaire data, or also called independent variable S, into the following criteria. The scoring of this questionnaire uses a Likert scale. To know about the student watching English movie habits. Second is score of listening test. The researcher categorizes the score result of listening test is also called dependent variable, are classified into the following criteria. And the indicator of this listening test is accuracy of answer and general understanding. And in analyze the data, is the analyzing data is the process of evaluating the hypothesis that the researcher established. The researcher will use a person-product moments formula to determine the correlation coefficient between two variables and how significant the correlation according to R et al. The person product moment is a very useful statistic for demonstrating the relationship between two variables. As a result, the researcher employed this formula because it is one of the most positive correlation measurements. And then from that, okay, this is the last part of my presentation about my research proposal. I'm sorry for all of my mistake, and then thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.